Would you describe your home as cozy and calm or chaotic and crazy? Do you ever feel overwhelmed and overstimulated by the clutter that seems to pile up? Do you find it hard to feel at peace amidst the piles of laundry, empty coffee mugs on the sink, and ever-growing list of things to do? If your home feels more like a transactional bus station and less like a sanctuary and retreat, then you're not alone. And in today's episode is for you. I'm joined by established author, mom of 7, wife, homeschool curriculum creator, and simplicity parenting coach, Jennifer Pepito. And in today's episode, you're getting several life-giving rhythms to create a peaceful home and simple habits to nurture your mind, body, and spirit and family so you can thrive as a mom and impact the kingdom by ministering to the next generation. Let's go.
Postpartum is hard. One second we feel like our bodies are miraculous, and the next we feel like we're a complete mess, out of touch with the strong, confident women we used to be. All while the fitness industry pressures us to bounce back as quickly as possible to a body that never looked like it was pregnant to begin with. That's why, whether we're 3 days postpartum or 3 years postpartum, we need the refreshing truth of gospel-focused fitness to give us energy for the physical challenges of motherhood, peace with our postpartum bodies, and kingdom-centered motivation to train for strength and stamina. So mama, whether you're sipping on cold coffee or folding 5-day-old laundry, I pray by listening every Monday, you become equipped, encouraged, and empowered for a strong motherhood, all for God's glory. This is the Strong Afterbirth Podcast. Thanks for joining us. All right, guys, welcome to the Strong Afterbirth Podcast. I am so excited to introduce to you today, Jennifer Pepito. Guys, I'm so glad to have Jennifer on the show today because she is going to talk with you about her latest book that was released in May. Jennifer, before I spoil all of the fun, I'm sure my audience would love to hear from you. Can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I love that. I am the mom of 7 children. Since you guys talk about birth and stuff, I had 4 children at home, 1 as a hospital unmedicated birth, 1 as an emergency C-section after a planned home birth, and then the last one a VBAC with an epidural. I thought your people who are in the throes of birth might enjoy hearing that.
Wow.
So 7 children over 15 years, and I work doing homeschool resources. So I create a preschool through middle school homeschool curriculum. And then my newest project is my book, Habits for a Sacred Home, and my community, Restoration Home Community, where we talk about just nurturing a healthy home, because so much of the development of our children really depends on like us being healthy as moms and having some habits and rhythm that create peace in our homes.
And that is exactly why it's so important for you to be on the show today, because so many of my listeners are really, like you said, in the throes of it. So we crave your wisdom, Jennifer. We need your wisdom. So super excited to have you on the show. Can I ask you a little bit, what got you interested in creating your homeschool curriculum? What pushed you over the edge to write a book? What got you here?
Yeah, I love homeschooling. I was a student of education homeschooling, and I read so many books about different methods and philosophies. And I also had a child with special needs. She had a processing disorder, and I saw that a lot of the homeschool curriculum that was available was very anti-development. So it did not incorporate motor skills development for younger children. And especially today, when so many kids are, given iPads young, or they're eating all their food out of pouches, it can be even more difficult for kids to get the sensory integration that they need for academics. And as I was working with my own special needs daughter, and we were doing different therapies, and I was reading about how to meet her needs, I just saw that some of these motor skills, things like climbing, playing wheelbarrow races, pushing, pulling, rolling, all of these kinds of things that just seem like fun, can really give our children an edge academically as they, in the early years, really coordinate both sides of their brain very efficiently. And, a lot of kids aren't necessarily getting that. They're just doing, some worksheets or something in preschool and not getting that motor skills development development that does ensure a better academic outcome.
That's really cool. So it sounds like it was really what was missing. And you said there's got to be a better way.
Right. And so all of the curriculum that I wrote sort of was generated from the holes that I saw after I've been homeschooling for 27 years. So the peaceful preschool first, and that was just like a way of helping families nurture these motor skills in their young children. And then I started writing a history cycle. I had family, I don't know if you've ever heard of Classical Conversations, but it's a homeschool program, and it's got some great aspects of it. I think it really helps people find community. But my sisters who were doing it, they weren't reading out loud to their kids. And I'm like, this is the core of a classical or Charlotte Mason education, is that we read aloud together and then we talk about things, and it helps our children learn how to think. And so I wrote my history cycles based on just the great literature that is available for children, like the Little House on the Prairie books or the Chronicles of Narnia. So yeah, I've been creating homeschool resources for about 8 years now, and that's been so much fun. And you know, my book, Habits for a Sacred Home, was kind of like the fruit of that, because I can see that when families work towards a better home atmosphere, then learning is almost natural. It's almost unavoidable. Whereas when we have a really chaotic home, it can actually inhibit learning.
And I want to talk about that today. Can we pull on that thread a little bit? Because I want to talk about where a lot of moms are right now. And I think that that is the seed that can be planted of chaos, right? Of like the habits that we form for ourselves. I'm a firm believer are habits that our kids will form in the future. My husband and I try to be very intentional. We read a book called Habits of the Household. So have you heard of it?
Oh yeah, we did that in our Restoration Home community last year. That was our book club.
Man, such a good read, right? Such a good read. But I feel like that really has helped us to kind of develop some like just liturgies and intentionality around our home and the words that we use over our son, and you know how we want to approach different aspects of parenting, right? And I think that you know how we take care of our health, how we take care of our bodies, how we take care of our homes is a reflection of how we view the gifts that God has given us. And I think it's kind of an aspect of theology that I don't know is talked about a whole lot, but that aspect of stewardship that plays out in how our homes are maintained. So it's an interesting topic, but tell me a little bit, what are your thoughts on this? If we are supposed to be, as children of God, as mothers, you know, we are supposed to know the King of Peace. We're supposed to know the peace that passes all understanding. Why do you think it's so hard for us to live in peaceful homes or to have those? Why is it so hard for us to have that peace?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's distraction. And honestly, I think it's very much, we're in a spiritual battle about it, because Jesus is always near. It's like it says in the word that I'm with you always, even to the end of the world. And so he's always near, but why can't we feel him? And if we could feel him, then probably we wouldn't pick up our phones as much, because in his presence is fullness of joy. But I think that, you know, instead what happens is we feel a little unrest, like our child won't sleep at night, or their latch isn't very good, or we're having all these emotions. And then instead of turning our face towards Jesus, we turn to our phones and distract ourselves. And I'm as guilty as the next person. I'm in the fight with you that, you know, we have to just start developing habits and putting in the work so that we can live intentionally with Jesus and be led by his spirit. And I don't think it's necessarily a rigid schedule. Like with young children, with babies, you can't have a rigid schedule. You have to be able to be responsive. You know, if one day they are teething and they need a little extra comfort, if another day they're going through a growth spurt and they need to nurse more often, like as mothers of young babies, we really have to be so responsive. And that means we can't have a rigid schedule, but we also can't be tuned out. Like we really have to be present so we know what is the next thing. And the crazy thing is, even infants pick up on how we feel. Like I can remember with one of my children, I was, for whatever reason, extra emotionally imbalanced at this time. And that child was the fussiest child, you know, and the more we can like lean into peace ourselves. And I think partly that does require, you know, maybe a little bit of self-care. If you've had a hard birth, maybe taking time to work through it with a counselor or a coach. There are seasons in our lives where they take a little extra out of us. And if we don't take the time to kind of nurture a little bit, you know, it makes it a lot harder to recover. I know for some moms, it can feel impossible to get the self-care that you need to have equilibrium. And in those cases, we even more have to just lean into letting Jesus comfort our hearts, lean into really even kind kind of picturing him with us in the struggle. Like if Jesus is sitting right beside you while you're trying to get your baby to latch, or if Jesus is right, holding you while you're trying to comfort your child and get them to sleep, then our peace would be greater, even if we're hormonal and we're tired and we don't have enough sleep and we're not really feeding ourselves very well. I think all of those things are really important. We need to have rhythms of self-care, but sometimes in those early years, it's not possible to get exactly as good a self-care as we need. And that's when we really need to lean hard into Jesus, who says, take my yoke upon you. I'm gentle and lowly, and with me, you'll find rest.
That's good. That's so good. You said a word in there. You said many incredible words, but one of the words that stuck out to me is the word nurture. And I'm sure that's probably a pretty core value of what you teach with homeschooling and with this book. But what about culture? What about our phones? What about social media? What about the news? What about that is so like unnurturing to us? What about that do you think is so distracting?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought it up, because really so often we're like, oh, I don't have time to make myself a healthy meal. But but look at our screen time. Like, how many hours did you sit and scroll Instagram? Oh, I don't have time to take a walk with a friend and get some fresh air. But same, like how many hours were you just sitting there scrolling? And I know sometimes the scroll can just be so easy and mindless and feel almost like, oh, I'm nurturing myself because I'm looking at other people taking walks in nature, cooking things,
Yeah.
But it really is so soul sucking. The things that will help you in this season is like going and walking on the grass and letting the morning sun shine on your face, or having a cup of hot water while you walk your baby. I mean, I don't know. I have definitely held hot beverages and my baby at the same time, but think about what your capacity is,
Yeah.
But, just doing things that nurture your senses in a way, that like eating a nice salad or getting some fruit or eating enough protein, or even calling in some reinforcements. Like this is a time to, maybe be collaborating with some other moms. Like, hey, I'm actually kind of struggling emotionally today. It would help me a lot to have a friend to just be here with me. Can you come over? Hey, I'm in my postpartum period. Can you come help me with laundry? And then in a couple months, when you're in that period, I'll help you. Just really collaborating. I actually, when I had my fourth child, I think I paid a homeschool teen not a lot of money to come just help bring me coffee in bed. Or, my oldest daughter was really offended by that. She wanted to be the one to do that. But, I think just being mindful that this is a precious season. This is a short season. And so instead of sort of squandering that with, like, I know with my first child, I didn't have a home birth with her. I didn't have a midwife giving me advice. And so I was like out shopping for birthday supplies 5 days after she was born and in tears because you don't fit into anything. And later when I had a midwife, she was like, no, the first 10 days, you have to pretend that your legs are broken. And I know that, once you have, like, I think 3 was the hardest transition for me. When you have 3 small children, they're like all 4 and under or something. It can be really hard to pretend your legs are broken.
Tell me how to do that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But just, learning to put things off. This is not the time. You don't have to be in a homeschool co-op when your child's in kindergarten. Like, you don't have to have a lot of obligations for leaving the house when you're in that childbearing phase where you're trying to, get babies into car seats. I mean, these are the days to keep things more of a rhythm than a schedule, so that you can have margin. If your child needs to be nursed before you leave the house, then you have time to stop what you're doing and nurse them. But if you're scheduling a bunch of outside classes and co-ops and things like that in those days, then you're just always going to be so frazzled and not really be able to be calm and responsive with our children, which makes it easier for them to learn.
Right. Yeah. I want to pull on that thread a little bit. What's the cost of our distraction? What's the cost of kind of living into that chaos or that rhythmlessness, right? What would you say would be the cost of that?
Yeah. I mean, the cost is attunement and connection. And with some of my children, I mean, I have had to repair, like there was, with one of my older children, my oldest daughter, one of the big moments in her life that she's had to invite Jesus into to bring comfort was when she was probably, maybe 4 or 3, like maybe just turned 4. And I was like doing a chore in the backyard because we just moved into a new house and I was very pregnant. And so the 4-year-old and the 2-year-old were supposed to be just like playing in the family room, which is right next to where I was working. So theoretically, it'd be easy for me to just check on them and they would be right there. But they went into the front yard. So I went into the house to check on them and they weren't there. And then they were outside in the front yard, which they'd probably, I don't know, maybe they'd gone to look for me. I don't know what was going on. But I yelled at my daughter, like, she's 4 years old. She shouldn't have been responsible. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I should have figured out, I should have not washed the blinds. Like, did the blinds really have to be washed then? You know what I mean? Some of these things, they feel so important in the moment. And so that moment of me, you know, really, like, I yelled at my 4-year-old. I put the responsibility on a 4-year-old of watching a 2-year-old and blamed her. So there was a lot of damage that was done. And, you know, for you moms who are listening and you're like, oh my gosh, I just yelled at my child 2 minutes ago. Like, there is grace and forgiveness. And thank God, it's like all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. We can't be perfect moms. If we could be, Jesus wouldn't have had to die. And so if you're listening to me and you're like, oh yeah, I've so damaged my kids already, don't wallow in shame. Just receive the forgiveness that God has provided for you, but also take heed. Like, you know, every bit of damage, like in my family, the moments that I got frazzled because I wasn't taking care of myself, or I was overscheduled, I was overworked, I was hormonal, whatever it was, those moments cause damage to my children. And so if you could learn from me and not make those mistakes, because, you know, when you look at culture and you look at people who are dealing with addictions or dealing with mental health issues, a lot of that does originate from childhood trauma. You know, there's a book called Scattered Minds by Gabor Mate, and he believes, he's a psychologist, he believes that ADD and ADHD are related to early childhood trauma. And so the more we can just embrace this season, it's so short. I know it's like when we're in it, we're like, I can do everything. I can get everything done. I don't need to slow down. But the cost sometimes of not slowing down a little bit is losing it on your kids and then feeling all that guilt and shame about it, is our own health being poorer, is, you know, more hormonal fluctuations and emotional flooding and things like that. So learning how to just slow down a little bit, make your decisions. You know, in that season, I would often use the excuse, oh, I need to ask my husband about that. You know, like, instead of just automatically saying yes to every demand, can you cook for the MOPS group? Can you bring the decorations? Can you, you know, some of these things are just like, they're not essential. I think it's wonderful to have celebrations, but I think sometimes we do overemphasize like the perfect first birthday party, or, you know, the perfect baby shower for a friend, or some of these things that maybe we make bigger in our heads than they actually are, compared to being present with people, compared to connection, compared to a healthy marriage, compared to a healthy self.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm 100% on board with you. How did you find yourself in that place? How did you get to that journey of kind of identifying? It sounds like you kind of had to go through the weeds of being overprogrammed and being the, you know, going through the frazzledness, but how did you find yourself in that place of, I need to say no? Was what led you to make that change? What was the tipping point for you?
You know, there's been a lot of different tipping points. It's interesting. My husband, when we had 5 young children, we moved to Mexico as missionaries. I talk about that a lot in my first book, Mothering by the Book. And so that season in my life where we were far away from family, and so I was completely detached, like I could not, because I'm very responsive. I like to say yes, but in that season, I couldn't go to every family gathering. I had to learn how to miss out. There were no co-ops or anything. I had to, you know, and we were missionaries. So it really wasn't kind of almost important to not be flashy or have big parties or do things like that. And so that season it was such a minimalist season that in a way it helped me reevaluate, you know, what is life-giving? What is actually important? And really every season after that, it was easier to be, you know, a little bit more thoughtful about like, is this Christmas tradition life-giving for my family, or does this make me crazy?
Yeah.
Is this, you know, school opportunity life-giving for my family, or will it drive me nuts? And early on, we actually wrote our family essentials. And in my Restoration Home group, I have the moms write down, what do you want your children to remember about life in your home? You know, just some questions like that, where if you think about it early on, then you can have this vision that you're working towards. But if you have no idea, then you're just every next Instagram trend or every next thing your friends are doing, you're going to be distracted by that. And then you'll just keep piling more and more things on yourself until, I mean, so many moms, I've seen them, burn out or, their marriages fall apart. And some of this could have been prevented just by pacing themselves a little bit more.
Yeah. And I'm curious too, one of the conversations my husband and I have a lot, this is just like a very practical question. What are y'all's thoughts on sports for your kids as far as over programming? That's one of the things where my husband and I go back and forth. I'm like, we see the value, there's good, but there's also like such a schedule and such like late nights and then early mornings. How did y'all navigate that? I'm just curious. I'm sure a lot of my moms were probably also like, I want my kid to be an athlete. So how did you guys navigate sports in particular? If you don't mind me asking a very specific question.
Yeah. I mean, I think every family is so different, and so because our family essentials were simple living, missions, family togetherness, living in the country, then sports were never a big option for us because for a while we lived so far out in the country, there's just nothing available. And then, later on, like my husband did martial arts with my kids for a couple of years until one of my sons broke his femur. So there was seasons where we might have been somewhat involved in sports, but because our family vision, our family essentials were so clear, our weekends in a way were kind of sacred. Like we wanted to work together in our yard. We wanted to take little trips as a family. So it was never a big pull for our family, but I'm not saying it's not important or like, family shouldn't do it. I think you just need to know what is important to your family, because for us, being together, talking, having close relationships, really being awake to God and to wonder, those things are important to us. And so then being in a hurry or rushing or being under pressure time-wise, or even the financial pressures of sports just didn't appeal to us.
Yeah, that's good. That's really the beauty of like essentialism and minimalism. I've read quite a few books about minimalism, essentialism by Jim McCowan. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it is you do learn, oh, that's actually not important or as important as I thought it was going to be. And I don't miss it when it's gone. And you kind of do learn these are the things that I really value. And these are what is life-giving to me and the calling that God has for me. So that's really cool. Now, in your latest book, you talk about sacred rhythms. Can you explain to us what are sacred rhythms? Why did you choose? I know those words. I'm getting to know that you're a very intentional person. So you didn't choose those words unspecifically, but what does a sacred rhythm mean to you?
Yeah. And, the book title is Habits for a Sacred Home. And I think sometimes that word sacred can be overwhelming to people, especially in the early years of motherhood. You're like, this is not sacred. Like this feels like a mess. There's
doesn't feel
diapers and people throwing up and I'm potty training. It just could feel so unsacred. But sacred just means consecrated to God. And so the idea of a sacred home or sacred rhythms is just acknowledging that for me as a believer, my days, my time, my home is consecrated to Him. And so as I'm making decisions about how we spend our time, I'm thinking like, how will this draw us closer to God? Or how will this create space in our relationship? And to me, it's like, every good and perfect gift comes from God. Like if we, in the world that we live in right now, where things are changing so fast and what made you successful in the past won't necessarily make you successful in the future, I think it's more important than ever to be tuned into God and to be really living in a relationship with Him where you are getting His ideas. Like there's a few different people I've read where they talk about how, even non-Christian authors like Elizabeth Gilbert in her book about creativity, I think it was called Big Magic. There's this idea that good ideas are out there and it takes intentional people who sort of see them. And in the book of Exodus, but it's the story of Moses and the burning bush. It's like he was moving slow enough in his life that he could notice when God was speaking and then delivered his people from bondage. And so for me as a believer, like I want to be moving slow enough and thoughtfully enough and with enough intention that if God says, here, do this project or that project, that I'm not like so into my own time schedule and my own to-do list that I can't pay attention. I think that's, the heart of like Habits for a Sacred Home is that you are cultivating almost a sanctuary where the ideas for restoration are available to you because you aren't in such a hurry. You're not just adopting every new trend that comes down the pike. You're actually being really thoughtful about what you do.
That's awesome. And and speaking of those new trends, like how would you differentiate this? I also enjoy like slow living as a lifestyle, enjoy minimalism in our home and have put a lot of those into practice. How would you describe the difference between maybe how the world would define a sacred home versus how we as believers would define a sacred home. Like, what would that space look like? What would that space feel like? Or how would we know, like, this is a sacred, set apart, consecrated home?
I think it's partly just the intention of our hearts, because for one family, a sacred set apart home might be a home where you do host a lot. You have a Bible study there often. And, for another family, it might be a home where you guys spend time in nature every day, and you're nature journaling and you're spending time with the Lord in nature. And so I think that to define, like, to me, there are, for instance, the book Habits for a Sacred Home is based on the rule of St. Benedict. And it was a rule that had some balance in it. Like, one of their mottos was ora et labora, which means work and pray. So I think there are some rhythms, like, do you pray in your home? That's like a basic rhythm of a sacred home. It doesn't mean you have to pray all day. Some families might have evening and morning prayer. Some families might just say a quick prayer on the way to school. So I think that every family is going to implement sort of sacred habits. The book is centered around almost like 9 values. So values of hospitality and community and simplicity and stability and order and work and prayer. And so, for each family, how you implement that, like, work was a big value for the Benedictines. And it's a big value in our home because we can't show hospitality very well, which is another of those values, if we don't put in the work of, like, at least having a basically sanitized home. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
If we're not taking time to sort of curate our atmosphere a little bit. But if I put having a perfect home above living a prayerful life, or even living a life where I'm honoring my husband, then that's putting one value out of order of the other values. Do you know what I mean? So I think it is really important to kind of look at some of these habits and sacred rhythms in context, so that, like, a rhythm or a virtue might be, in our family, we are respectful and honoring to each other. So that means that, we speak nice to the kids, and the kids speak nice to adults. And there's a habit in place that sort of highlights that value of order or obedience. But then also, having hospitality, and sometimes it can feel like values are in opposition to each other if aren't prayerful and thoughtful about how we implement them, because you might love the idea of having a sacred rhythm of hospitality, but your husband might be more of an introvert and be a little bit done in by all of the hosting that you're doing. And so I think, just really integrating your family needs and your family essentials, your family personality in a way, into the way that you create your own sacred rule of life is important. So, like, in the book, at the end of each chapter, there are suggestions for how you could implement these habits, so it's like in the chapter on simplicity, I mean, you could not buy things that you don't need, or you could make sure you get rid of something before you bring something new into your home. Or, there's every family is going to be so different in the way they implement a rule of life or values. But I think if we don't have any identification of what our values are, then it's just so easy to be completely distracted, have no vision for where we're going. And then in a way, just not parent. I think that's a big fault in culture today, is that people are relying on public schools to parent their children. And actually the public school values are probably not your values. Like, if you are a Christian family, there's probably a lot of values that are almost in opposition. Like, there's such a, in some of the textbooks that I've seen in the public schools, there's such a victim narrative that's very common to people who are trying to foment a revolution. And if you're not aware and sort of like paying attention, then you're just part of destroying culture. But if you can just be a little bit more thoughtful and think about, what is important to us, I would say that for, believing families, it's important to Deuteronomy 6, your families, like, speak about these things as you rise up and as you lie down. And that's probably a bare minimum for living a sacred life.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So let's say mom is listening to this and she's like, I haven't had a split second to stop and think about my core values, or stop and think about what is essential to me. What are my family essentials? So if a mom is wanting to develop those for herself, how would you recommend she start? What's the first step for mom who wants to start building those sacred rhythms?
Yeah. I actually have a course called The Peaceful Life, and it kind of walks you through those first steps. Because partly you sort of have to identify, what are you doing, and is it life-giving? You have to identify, what do you want your home to feel like? What do you want your children to remember? Because when you start to identify what you do want, then it's easier to figure out what doesn't fit. Like for me, I want my children to remember that we, spent time talking and laughing together, that we read books around the fire, that we had tea times together, that we celebrated each other, that our home was a cozy place, that we took walks in nature. And all of those things are intentional, because all of those are like learning to be present with each other so that they know what it even feels like to be present with God. Yeah. So because those are my values, then I have been more careful to curate our schedule. Even in the years before we went to Mexico, I would sort of simplify to only 1 or 2 days of errands a week, so that my children had many afternoons of just playing by our creek and playing in the forest and just lots of free time to be, because that was our value. And so I think it's just so important to identify your values first and then go from there. And I know for moms, sometimes you are so busy, you don't even know, but I think it might even help to start with what you don't like about your life. Like, what feels out of order in your life? Is it that you are rushing too much? Is it that you don't have any time to breathe? Is it that you don't have time to think about what's important to you? I think, sometimes maybe even journaling a little bit about what you don't love about your life can help. And we just came out with a little journal. It's called the Restoration Home Questions for a Rule of Life. It's on Amazon. And it's like a whole book of 52 questions to kind of help moms evaluate some of this. Cause I know when you're in the early stages of parenting, it can be really hard to think about schedules or rhythms, and you just like feel good half the time. Like I remember those days of being pregnant and you feel so awful. And so it can be so hard to feel like you're being intentional or to be at all intentional about your life. And in those days, I think one of the things you can do is just start feeding your spirit, because what has given me the ability to have a vision is having good inputs. Like I read early on as a mom, I would read books by Raymond and Dorothy Moore about homeschooling, or I read the Charlotte Mason Companion about, or For the Family's Sake by Susan Schaefer Macaulay. I read books about beautiful families. And so the inputs were coming in, and then that's what helped me have a vision. If I was just on Instagram and then the problem with social media is it's little sound bites of 1,000 different worldviews. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like 1 minute, there's this beautiful little yard. And then another minute, it's like, take time looking through magazines and ripping out pictures and gluing them on a collage board. And this, if you have children who are old enough to glue and cut, this can be a fun thing to do with your kids, to just start to think about like, what does make our family come alive? What is life-giving to us as a family? Because, I think there's 2 parts. It's like, on the one hand, you have to start identifying what's not working, but you also have to start building a vision. And part of that does just come from feeding your spirit with beauty and truth. And then there's something that comes out of that.
And I think that one of the things with social media is it creates, I don't know if you've noticed this too, it creates this normalcy around hustle culture. And like you said, that victimization of like, well, life is just happening to us, and it's just the way that life has to be. And it's like motherhood victimization, which just, it feels really sad to me, because it makes moms feel like they have no choice but to live constantly exhausted. And I'm not saying that motherhood should be a cakewalk. I don't think God designed motherhood to be that. I think he designed it to be sanctifying, but not necessarily simple. I think that when we can identify those values, it really helps us to gatekeep for our home. Of that's a hard no, and that's an easy yes, because this is in line with our values. Would you say that you've experienced that? It feels like a gatekeeper for you, for your home?
Yeah, for sure. Just having identified what's important to us, then it's been really easy. I mean, there's been a lot of no's in my life, like, even to fun things, there have been no's, because I know that the energy of my family and the time that I have, like, even now, my youngest is 15 out of 7. And I'm just so aware of how fast that went. And I'm so thankful that, for a lot of that time, I did not have access to social media.
Mm.
For a lot of that time, I was a dedicated stay-at-home mom. Like, there was a season where I had to work, but, I've been really, really fortunate to have a lot of time to just be with my kids and invest in my kids. And like, I love who they are. I mean, it was raining here the other day, and it was the first rain of the season.
Mm.
And my 15-year-old son was so excited about the rain and the storm, and he invited me to go on a walk with him in the rain. And I was just like, so many other 15-year-olds are just, they're on social media, or they're on a computer game. Like, they're just completely numbed out from life, and they're not able to notice God. And it's like, my son could, he might not have phrased it like that. He might not have been like, I'm going to go outside because God's in the storm. Do you know what I mean? He might not have said it like that, but he was still awake to wonder enough to notice like the beauty of the sky and the thunder and the lightning and the sunset and the rain. And just like, when we are awake to wonder like that, then we can be led by the Spirit. And we are living in times in history. We just, we watched as a family the movie A Tale of Two Cities last night, which is about the French Revolution. And in that time period in history, the rich people had done some really bad things, but then the middle class incited the peasants to this bloodthirsty revolution. And it's like, so many of them, there was a lot of bitterness towards the rich people who had done some bad things. And then they incited everybody to this revolution that threw out God. Like, France is still suffering from the absence of faith in the wake of that bloody revolution. And I think that's what we're watching in culture, is that so many people are so spiritually dead. They're not attuned. And partly they're not attuned because they've been so wounded by their parents or their grandparents, or felt abandoned or whatever. And so then you have this culture of bitter people who are easily manipulated. And that's, I think that is so important. Like, we're trying to, be good moms, or be Christian moms, or be healthy moms, or whatever it is. But I think we just have to recognize that it's like, there is life in God. There is wisdom in God, in his presence is fullness of joy. And so if we aren't minimalizing and curating our lives enough that as a family, we can be aware of what he's doing and how he's moving, if we're just always distracted and being sort of enraged by whatever the latest rage bait is, then we're just easily manipulated. And we could be part of that kind of a movement, like the French Revolution or the Nazi, it's like, God forbid that any of us would do that. And yet, I mean, there's some of that kind of hatred of certain people groups or whatever happening today.
No, it's valuable to anchor yourself to the rock that never changes, and to have an anchor, not be so shifted like the sand. I think that the beauty of that, I like you talk about your home being a sanctuary, because I think if you think about like a church sanctuary, that's where worship happens. And worship is our most natural and healthy bend and state that we can be in. Like, being in worship is being in a state of experiencing God's love. And I think physiologically, when we can get ourselves into that state of worship, which can happen in the home when it is a sanctuary, that worship just, it anchors us in love. And I think that is a big part, if, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a huge part of the healing of trauma, is having a home that is a sanctuary. Not only, because I was talking to my counselor about some, just things in the past. And she said, are you concerned this is going to affect you as a parent? And I said, well, absolutely. And she said, well, here's the good news. You only have to get it right 50% of the time, because you have the Holy Spirit within you, show up. And, but I think that it's even more powerful when we have homes that can create an environment and foster that worship. And the only way we can experience that worship is being present to the wonder. And I'm curious, I hear you throw around that word wonder. Are you friends with Jen Weaver at all? Have you read her book?
No, I don't. No, I don't know who that is.
All right. Jen Weaver, she was on my podcast just a couple of months ago, but she wrote a book called it's escaping me right now. Wonder is in the title. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you
Okay.
this episode, and I'll link it in the show notes for our listeners too. But she wrote a book literally about, it's a book of poetry about wonder and wondering about God. And so I was curious to know if that language was intentional, because she just uses that word so often, but being in that state of just wonder and childlike, just awe of God's character and his goodness. So, well, I'd like to tie us down in this question. I always like to end my guest interviews with a question of what if, because there are listeners who've maybe tried some of these things. Maybe they've tried in the past. Maybe they're in, a different stage of motherhood than they used to be, but maybe they've tried some of these things. Maybe they've minimized, maybe they've stylized, they've organized, they've done all of the things to their home, but it still doesn't quite feel like a sanctuary. What are some things or some words of wisdom, comfort, encouragement, tips? What's something that you would offer that woman who's feeling like she's done all the work, but still quite not feeling it?
Yeah. I think that it's important to make happy memories, honestly. Like, I think that when we're feeling discouraged, we need to anchor ourselves in a moment, a happy moment, because it almost gives us like a launching pad to accomplish something. If we're always looking at the deficiencies and what I've done wrong and where I haven't made it yet, I think that it can be so defeating. It can put us in a shame spiral. But if we can anchor ourselves with a moment where things were hopeful, where we did feel peaceful, where where we were having fun, then it's easier from that space to get some equilibrium. And for me, like, I think one of the biggest keys to staying connected to God, being awake to wonder, there's lots of different ways to say it, is being very thorough about forgiveness. Like, being almost like zealous about it, because the Bible says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath, lest you give the enemy a foothold. And I think that there's a real warning in that when we nurse bitterness and resentment, and it's so easy, like every day we're going to be disappointed. Like our husbands, their brains were completely different from us. We're probably going to be disappointed by them. Our children, they're not all going to be, it's like I have special needs children. I have children who have learning disabilities. Like there's going to be disappointments in parenting. There's so much disappointment in life. It's just a part of life. But if we can be very attentive to forgiveness, to just like, I forgive myself for the way I messed up today. And thank you, God, for forgiving me. Thank you, God, for forgiving me. I forgive my child for the fact that they are still not potty trained, even though I've been trying so hard. And I forgive my child for the way, and we don't do that in person with the person. It's just more like a private thing, but it's a way of continually releasing those resentments to God and blessing those people so we don't get this hard edge. Because, I'm sure we've both seen women who, as they get older, they're disappointed with their kids or disappointed with their husbands, and they just have this hard edge that makes them very unpleasant to be around. And they start to lose hope. And it's like, I think there's another verse that says hope deferred dries up the bones, And so I think, disappointment is destructive to our health, and destructive to our mental health, and it's destructive to our family. So if you can make a practice of just being very active about forgiving people right away, then you can stay more like, be able to have happy memories and be able to create joyful moments and be able to connect with people when we're not holding them in judgment.
That's beautiful. That's so good. Those are good words. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed having you on as a guest, and you've got so many good words of wisdom. And guys, she recorded all of the words of wisdom for you in her book. So go check it out. It will be linked here in the show notes, as well as a few other things that we mentioned in this episode. But Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the show. Any last words of wisdom, anything you'd like to part with us with?
Oh, I'm so thankful for this opportunity. And I know your moms, so many of them are in the early years of parenting, and I just hope they can savor like the smell of their baby's breath and that beautiful soft skin and the way that they look at you. It's such a precious time, but it's over really, really fast. So I hope you can savor it.
Savor is a rich word. That's good. That's good. All right, Jennifer. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Appreciate it. Until next time, guys, stay strong. All the love, Coach Laura.